Welcome to San Diego. With almost 1.4 million inhabitants, it's the second largest city in California after Los Angeles and the 8th most populous city in the US. The city is known for its mild year-round climate, deep water harbor, plenty of beaches and parks, and its long association with the United States Navy. Today I'm kicking off a mini-series about San Diego, and in this first episode we're going to visit the Cabrillo National Monument, where I talk about the history and significance of this California historical landmark. And with that, let's go ahead and start the tour. San Diego is located 120 miles south of Los Angeles, and downtown San Diego is only 20 miles north of Tijuana, just past the US-Mexico border. The Cabrillo National Monument is located at the southernmost tip of the Point Loma Peninsula. The monument is part of the National Park Services. If you have a National Park annual pass, make sure to bring it for free entry. Otherwise, the fee to get in is $20 per vehicle, $15 per motorcycle, or $10 per person entering by foot or bicycle. You also have the option to purchase an annual pass just for the Cabrillo National Monument for $35. The park is open 365 days a year from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., with the Bayside Trail closing at 4 p.m. and the Tidepools at 4:30 p.m., but more on that later. I suggest starting out at the Visitor Center. There are rangers and volunteers available to answer any questions you may have, and there's also a little gift shop. Around the Visitor Center, you can enjoy some nice views of San Diego and the San Diego Bay. On the left-hand side, you see the naval base Point Loma, which is where Cabrillo landed back in 1542. On the other side of the harbor channel is the Naval Air Station, which is why you often see helicopters and other planes in the area. The air station is on Coronado, and all the way to the right is where the iconic Hotel del Coronado and the Coronado Bridge are located. Behind Coronado in the distance is downtown San Diego. And further right is where the Mexican-US border is located. Next to the Visitor Center, you'll also find an auditorium where they regularly show documentaries, and you'll also find an exhibit which helps understand the historical context of this area. Climbing out of his boat and onto shore in 1542, Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo stepped into history as the first European to set foot on what is now the west coast of the United States. Cabrillo was born in Spain, and not much is known about his early years until 1519, when his name appears in the ranks of serving in the army of famous conquistador Hernán Cortés. He fought in the battles between the Aztecs and the Spanish, which the Spanish ultimately won mainly due to a disease that swept through the Aztec defenders. After the defeat, Cabrillo eventually settled in Guatemala, establishing himself as a leading citizen by the mid-1530s. He took advantage of the encomienda system in the New World, in which the King of Spain granted leases for land that often came with the right to use forced indigenous labor. Cabrillo was granted the right to farmlands and mines, and was also known for his shipbuilding operations. His businesses on land and at sea, and his resulting wealth, depended on slave labor, with indigenous Guatemalans being forced to work on his farms, mines, shipyards, and vessels. The governor of Guatemala planned to establish a trading route between Central America and the Spice Islands, which is known as Indonesia today. He selected Cabrillo to build and provision the ships to explore the Pacific. Cabrillo set out to explore the north and west coast of what they called New Spain, which is Mexico. He departed from the port of Navidad, Mexico, near modern-day Manzanillo, on June 27, 1542, with 3 ships, and arrived 103 days later at what he described closed and very good port, calling it San Miguel, which is known today as the San Diego Bay. It is believed that he anchored his flagship, the San Salvador, on Point Loma's east shore near the land that is now the Cabrillo National Monument. Though the San Salvador stayed only 6 days in San Diego Harbor, this journey and future Spanish journeys to the area would shape Southern California's complex history. Cabrillo later died during the expedition due to complications of a shattered limb he sustained during a skirmish with an indigenous tribe, but his crew continued on, possibly as far as Oregon, before winter storms forced them back to Mexico. The Cabrillo National Monument, established in 1913, remembers Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo's voyage of exploration. It was the first contact between the coastal California indigenous tribes, like the Kumeyaay, and men from Europe. The Kumeyaay tribes had already lived in the area for thousands of years and would continue to be the primary human shapers of the landscape until the Spanish established a fort and mission system in San Diego in 1769. From the monument, a short walk up the hill takes you to the Old Point Loma Lighthouse. Along the way, make sure to take in some more of those nice ocean views. Once you get closer to the lighthouse, you do have the option to go on the Bayside Trail. Plan about 1 hour for the hike. But we are staying here at the lighthouse. In 1851, just a year after California became a state, the United States Coast Survey traveled along the Pacific coast to determine the sites for the first 8 West Coast lighthouses to be constructed by the US government. San Diego, as the southwest boundary of the US, was an obvious choice for a lighthouse. The tip of Point Loma, at an elevation of 422 feet, was the perfect spot since the light of a lighthouse could be seen from the ocean, as well as the bayside of Point Loma. Construction of the lighthouse began in 1854 and was put into service in November 1855. The architectural style was of Cape Cod design, with a tower centered in the 2-story dwelling. You can go inside the lighthouse to see the lighthouse keeper's living quarters, and interestingly, in just under 36 years of operation, 11 principal keepers and 22 assistant keepers served at Point Loma Lighthouse. Low pay and isolation from town likely were the main contributors to the high turnover. The old lighthouse had several different functions over the years, such as serving as a radio and signal tower, army post exchange, tea house, and visitor center. While it was quite run down at times, a life-saving rehabilitation took place between 1933 and 35 when the Cabrillo National Monument was integrated within the National Park Service. Through time, other structures were added around the old lighthouse, such as this catch basin. In this building here, you can have a closer look at the light system used in the lighthouse. Initially, it was planned to install argand lamps and parabolic reflectors, which was used in most US lighthouses before the 1850s. However, French physicist Augustin Fresnel created a lens apparatus in 1822 that changed the way lighthouses would be illuminated. The Fresnel lens is shaped like a glass bullet with many prisms and bullseyes. When the light flashes, the light is concentrated into lots of individual beams that radiate out like spokes on a wheel. When the light is fixed, the light is uninterrupted like a big sheet. There are different sizes of Fresnel lenses, and a third-order lens, which is a medium-sized one, was installed at this lighthouse. The Old Point Loma Lighthouse is actually the highest in the US, and while initially the location was seen as the perfect spot for a lighthouse, the elevation was the main reason for its short operation of only 36 years, as the light was oftentimes obscured by fog and low clouds. A new Point Loma light station was established at a lower elevation in March 1891. Once you're done at the lighthouse, continue further down the path. At times you can see gray whales from here, and you have nice views of the Pacific Coastline. And below us is the area with all the tide pools, which we will visit shortly. You'll loop back around, enjoy some more nice views, and walk past the lighthouse again. As you continue and turn left, you'll encounter a small structure that was part of a coastal defense system. Built by the US Army in 1918, the radio station helped to defend the San Diego harbor during World War II. 3-man teams operated around the clock, communicating with ships entering the channel. During World War II, soldiers used the building as a meteorological station to support coastal artillery. Right behind this small structure and up the stairs lies a World War II bunker where soldiers spent thousands of hours watching for an attack that never came. Unlike soldiers who fought enemies across the ocean and in Europe, these watchmen battle against boredom and frustration. Alright, now it's time to check out the tide pool area. There is a parking lot down here, so you can just drive down from the visitor center parking lot to this one. We'll walk along a short trail along the Pacific coast to get to the tide pools. Note that the tide pool area closes at 4:30 p.m. and opening times can vary depending on the tide. In general, the best time to visit is during the fall and winter months when the tides are low during park hours. During spring and summer, the tide usually covers the tide pools while the park is open. So what are tide pools? Well, tide pools are depressions in rocks that are formed over millions of years through a combination of biological, physical, and chemical processes. Tide pools need a rocky coastline to form. As the tide goes from high to low, pools of water are left behind among the rocks, forming tide pools. As the water moves away from the shoreline during a low tide, water and critters are trapped in these tide pools. It's fun to explore the tide pools and see all the different animals. Just be careful as some areas are very slippery. Definitely wear closed-toe shoes and don't try to walk around here in flip-flops. Altogether, I would plan at least 2, maybe even 3 hours for your visit to the Cabrillo National Monument, and add another hour if you decide to hike the Bayside Trail. It's a much bigger area and there's so much more to see than what I thought before visiting, so plan accordingly. I really hope you enjoyed this tour of the Cabrillo National Monument and that it gave you some insights into the history of the area and also some helpful tips on visiting. In the next episode, we're going to explore Old Town San Diego with its rich history, excellent eateries, and shops. If you enjoy the tours I put together on this channel, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe button. That helps me out tremendously. And with that, I say thank you and Dankeschön!